What happens when soldiers trained to destroy face a choice, kill or save the very people they'd been taught to hate? In 1945, on Okinawa, the final, bloodiest siege of the Pacific, that impossible question stopped men in their tracks. Machines of war met human faces. Mothers, children, terrified villagers told Americans were demons. For a few soldiers, the answer wasn't automatic. Against orders, against fear, they hesitated. They lowered rifles. They offered food, bandages, an outstretched hand. One act of mercy, one moment of proof. It wasn't just kindness. It changed the battle, and everything that came after. Okinawa, 1,945, a cratered, smoking ruin that smells of cordite and death, a meat grinder. American units claw forward, yard by bloody yard, against a Japanese army dug into caves and concrete. Tanks grind, shells scream, men press on with hollow eyes. It's relentless, brutal, intimate combat, and in those shattered streets, civilians are trapped in the crossfire. The battlefield is a dense urban sprawl, narrow streets choked with rubble, collapsed roofs hanging like broken teeth, market stalls turned into tombs, and everywhere people press like a second kind of debris. Men, women, children, huddled in doorways, clutching scarves in one another, eyes wide with a fear that has nothing to do with strategy. Shell fragments spit sparks. Sniper cracks bite the air. Babies wail. An old man tries to guide a woman across a street, slick with smoke and oil. They move like ghosts, terrified of the invisible line between life and sudden death. In this maze, civilians are not collateral, they are the landscape. A terrible lie is hammered into every home. The Americans aren't human. They are demons, monstrous, merciless, unworthy of mercy. Posters scream it. School teachers repeat it. Soldiers and officers broadcast it from radios and pulpits. Stories of mutilation and torture are rehearsed like scripture until fear becomes reflex. Men clutch grenades not for defense but as insurance of honor. Mothers rock children not to sleep, but to prepare them for death. This isn't just wartime propaganda. It's an instrument of control that turns civilians into weapons against themselves. And it builds a brutal rule: surrender is a shameful sin. The message was simple, relentless, carved into every mind. Surrender was not an option. It was shame, dishonor, a fate worse than death itself. Parents repeated it to children. Priests and teachers echoed it. Military leaflets, shouted orders, whispered rumors all fed the same terrible certainty until fear became instinct. So when shells began to fall and strangers in uniforms appeared on the horizon, many Okinawans did not think of living. They thought only of avoiding a humiliation they had been trained to dread. That conviction hung over the island like a storm cloud, setting the scene for the impossible choices about to come. The house convulses as artillery slams the island, earth jumping, glass snapping, a high, terrible wail from the sky. Shell fire is everywhere. Every breath tastes of dust and metal. Floorboards shudder under your boots. Walls thud like a heartbeat gone wrong. In the hush between blasts, you hear muffled sobs beneath the rubble, a human sound swallowed by war, waiting to be found. Beneath the rubble of their home, Sachiko Miyagi holds her little daughter Yuki so tight, their breathing blends into one shallow, ragged whisper. Dust cakes their hair and lips. The air tastes of smoke and hot metal, and every tiny shift of the wreckage sends a storm of grit into their mouths. Yuki whimpers, a sound no soldier should ever hear, and Sachiko presses her cheek to the child's, trading warmth for courage, fingers clawed into broken beams as if she could anchor them to the world. Outside, the shells scream and the house groans, but what rattles Sachiko more than the bombardment is the silence after the waiting for what, in her mind, will come next. Sachiko's eyes are wide with terror, not from the shells, but from what comes after. She clutches little Yuki to her chest. The child is limp with dust and fear, unaware of the meaning behind the shaking. This isn't the fear of artillery, it's a fear fed by years of whispers and banners, by elders who taught that the approaching soldiers are not people but monsters who will rape, mutilate, and dishonor. She is not listening for a rescue. She is listening for footsteps she has been told mean doom. Every shadow becomes a uniform, every distant shout a promise of horror. She waits, every muscle coiled, for the demons to arrive. Suddenly the shelling stops, silence so thick it presses into your bones, broken only by the crackle of distant fires, the ragged cries of the wounded, and the high ringing in survivors' ears. For a heartbeat, the world holds its breath, and then something else begins, a low, rolling threat coming closer. Then the ground trembles, a low, rolling rumble that crawls through your bones. Metal groans, tank treads churn the dirt, and a column of soldiers' heavy boots stamps out a new kind of thunder. Dust stirs, plaster flakes. A child's small whimper is swallowed by marching feet. For Sachiko and little Yuki, raised on stories of demons, this sound isn't just loud, it's the moment the lie finally collides with reality. To many Okinawans, surrender wasn't an option, it had been reframed as the deepest dishonor, a fate worse than death, and that lie was enforced with relentless cruelty. Village elders and military officers became judges, jury, and executioner, stalking anyone who showed fear or questioned the orders. Neighbors watched neighbors dragged out and killed for even whispering the word surrender. Fear took the shape of ritual, public threats, coerced confessions, the promise that mercy would bring shame to the whole community. The result was a society pushed to the edge, where choosing to live felt like betraying everything they had been taught to protect. They were given 2 grenades like a ritual, one to throw at the enemy, one to end their own lives. It wasn't charity, it was policy. Village leaders, under orders and under fear, handed death like ration cards and told mothers and fathers this was the only honor left. Imagine holding cold metal in your palm and being told it's the ticket to dignity or oblivion. The message sank in deeper than shells. Propaganda had not just dehumanized the Americans, it had taught civilians to arm themselves against themselves. The next wave of advancing troops would meet not just resistance, but prepared self-destruction. As American troops push forward, they don't find tidy battle lines so much as a landscape of private despair, bodies crumpled in doorways, ropes knotted over beams, handheld grenades clutched like talismans against capture, an awful hush broken by the occasional muffled sob. Mothers press children to their chests, and fathers fumble with pins, choosing the final, terrible dignity they were taught to crave. The sight as a moral gut punch training doesn't cover this. Men who expected bullets now confront lives ended by their own hands, and for a young private like Danny Kowalski, hardened on distant aisles, the front has become a new kind of battlefield, one of conscience. Private Danny Kowalski was young and battle-hardened from fights on faraway islands, the kind of soldier whose reflexes were sharpened by orders and survival, but nothing he'd learned prepared him for this. Streets where civilians chose death over capture, women clutching grenades, children with hollow, frightened eyes. The air smelled of cordite and burned rice. His training screamed for speed, clear the sector, neutralize threats while something deeper in him balked. He felt the rules of war slip away. In that ruined neighborhood, the enemy began to look less like a camouflaged rifleman and more like a taught terror that turned mothers into executioners. And Kowalski stood frozen, rifle heavy in his hands, trying to reconcile duty with horror. For soldiers like Kowalski, The enemy isn't a uniform or a bunker. It's an idea, an engineered terror, so complete it convinces mothers to kill their own children rather than be taken alive. That kind of enemy doesn't fit the doctrine you drilled into your bones. It shreds your moral map. Training teaches you to shoot, to clear a room, to survive. It doesn't teach you how to face a terrified woman clutching a grenade and decide whether pulling the trigger is mercy or murder. On Okinawa, doctrine and humanity collide, and the thin line meant to protect civilians begins to dissolve. On paper, the rules of war are simple. Civilians are off limits. On Okinawa, those lines blurred until they virtually vanished. Propaganda had turned ordinary families into potential threats. Village leaders handed out grenades and punished those who dared to surrender, and fighters slipped among mothers and children in shattered homes. For American troops trained to distinguish combatant from non-combatant, every encounter became a gut test where hesitation could mean death and aggression could mean murder. Doctrine promised moral clarity. The battlefield offered none. Men who had sworn to protect found themselves in a single breath, deciding whether to pull a trigger or to trust a face, a choice that would haunt them for years. Everything tightens into a moral vice. Every cave, every shattered home could hide a machine gun nest or a mother clutching her child, primed to choose death over capture. Soldiers step forward with rifles and training, but training doesn't teach you how to tell the difference between a sniper and a terrified family. Hesitate, and a bullet finds you. Move too fast, and you become the judge and executioner of innocence. The air tastes of dust and fear. Somewhere a child whimpers. Decisions are not split seconds, but lifetimes, and in that filthy, silent calculus there is no right move. Kowalski's squad moves down the street like a slow, clinical tide, clearing one ruined house after another. They check every doorway, sweep every shattered room, voices clipped into commands, boots scuffing rubble. The air tastes of dust and old smoke. Behind boarded windows, people press back against walls, faces pale, eyes wide their terror, a physical thing. Every shadow threatens a rifle. Every child looks like a trap. The men lean hard on training, on muscle memory, on the thin calculus of survival, and still their hands shake. They are fighting ghosts and a terrified populace. Kowalski edges forward, searching for anything that moves. Amid the rubble-strewn street, Kowalski freezes a flicker, a shift in a collapsed porch, movement where a home once stood. He swings his rifle up, finger tight on the trigger. Every training cue snaps taut. Sniper. He breathes shallow, sighting the dark gap, heart pounding, braced for the flash that could end him. He moves forward on silent feet, heart pounding, breath caught in his chest as dust and smoke choke the ruined street. The rifle is raised, finger tight on the trigger. Every lesson and warning drilled into him, howling like a siren. Neutralize the threat while time stretches, and the silence between explosions feels like a verdict, forcing him to choose action over fear. Kowalski leans in, breath held. The rubble close enough to touch dust motes swirl in the beam of his helmet light, and his eyes fight to find purchase in the dark. Every muscle is wound tight, every lesson, every warning, ready to snap. He expects the flash of steel, the glint of a barrel, the sudden movement that will justify the shot. He waits. Nothing sharp cuts the gloom. He doesn't see a soldier, he doesn't see a weapon. For a beat there is only the hollow sound of his own breathing and something small and human, curled and trembling, a shape that refuses the story he was taught. Kowalski's eyes lock on Sachiko's face streaked with dust, lips moving in a prayer he recognizes only by the cadence of fear. She curls around Yuki like a shield, The little girl's whimper is so small it might be swallowed by the rubble, but he hears it anyway. Time compresses. The screech of metal, the echo of orders, everything narrows to 3 breathing bodies in a dark hole. They are not soldiers. They are cornered animals, every muscle taut for the end they expect. He feels the rifle tremble in his hands, the taut line between target and human ready to snap. Kowalski stares into their dark, frantic eyes, and for the first time, he sees the thing the propaganda promised, not a soldier, but a mirror reflecting terror, a child's nightmare of demons. It hits him like a blow. This fear has been fed, rehearsed, worshipped. He feels the rifle in his hands like a question mark. Every lesson he was taught says aim. Every human impulse says stop. How do you prove humanity to someone convinced it doesn't exist? There isn't time for speeches. There isn't time for orders. He has to show them, right now, or they'll choose the lie over life. Sachiko clamps herself over Yuki like a shield, every muscle coiled, every breath a small, scared sound, ready for the final, terrible act they were taught to accept. Her hands are shaking, her lips move but no words come out. She mouths a prayer she learned as a child, a plea for dignity in the face of a fate pitched as noble. Yuki presses her face into Sachiko's shoulder and whimpers, the sound almost swallowed by the rubble and the sudden quiet. Outside, boots pause. A silhouette lingers in the doorway. For a heartbeat, the world holds its breath. Kowalski stands frozen, every reflex on a hair trigger, while a lifetime of training presses down on him like an iron glove. He is a man built to react, to make the split-second choice that keeps him alive. But in that collapsed house, the faces he's been taught to hate are not faceless targets. They're a mother and a child, breathing dust and fear, clutching one another as if that alone could keep them whole. Memories of bombed-out beaches and screams flash behind his eyes. His finger itches at the trigger, and his heart argues for mercy. And then a radio crackle snaps in the distance, orders to keep moving. Static. Then a terse voice over the radio. Move up. Secure the area. His squad leader's bark is a drumbeat, no hesitation, no mercy. Orders like that are survival scripture. Kowalski's finger hovers on the trigger. Training screams move. The mission must come first. But the command collides with what he sees, a terrified mother and a child, and for the first time in weeks, he stalls. But instead of a monster, Sachiko and Yuki see a man young, worn, and painfully human, every line on his face a map of sleepless nights and too many funerals. His eyes are what stops them. Tired, hesitant, not hungry for blood, but heavy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from doing what must be done, and then asking yourself, why? In that single, silent moment, the demon story falters. The caricature they've been fed creaks and shifts. The child's small whimper meets a gaze that doesn't glint with cruelty but with doubt, and for the first time the possibility of mercy slips into their terror. Kowalski's world narrows to a throat-clenching calculus. The crackle of distant fire, the radio bark of orders, the ever-present fear of a hidden sniper, and two faces, a mother and a child huddled like prey in the dark. Every lesson he'd been taught screams at him to fire, to move on, to survive. But training is a map. People are not. In the space between instinct and action, he feels something else take hold. Fatigue, pity, a stubborn refusal to become the thing he's been told to hate. Against the chaos and against his own survival reflex, he chooses to try something different. He lowers his rifle. The metallic click hangs in the air and, for a beat, the island's thunder seems to stop listening. It's a tiny noise, mechanical, ordinary, but in that blasted silence it sounds like a promise, not to kill, but to let something else live. Kowalski feels every lesson he was taught press against his ribs: training, fear, orders, but the click is the first law he follows that isn't in a manual. Sachiko freezes, Yuki burrows closer, and the platoon, 100 yards away, hears a choice become a sound. That single, ordinary click changes what comes next. The metallic click still hangs in the air as he doesn't raise the rifle again. Instead, he moves like someone learning a new language, slow, careful, almost apologetic. He reaches out his hand, not with a weapon but with an open palm, fingers relaxed, empty, offering something no one on either side expected in that moment: choice. Dust drifts between them, sunlight catches on the grains, and for the first time, the posture of a soldier looks more like a promise than a threat. It's a tiny, dangerous mercy, one gesture that could save a life or seal his own, but it cracks the story they've been told. She flinches, but she doesn't pull away. Dust flakes in her hair. Yuki's small body trembles against her chest. For years she'd been fed one story: that these men were monsters, the kind who deserved no mercy. Now there is a human hand, empty, patient, reaching toward them. Confusion warps her features. Her whole life has been built on certainty, and that certainty is cracking. Part of her still prepares for the worst, fingers tight where a grenade might have been, but another stranger part feels curiosity, then relief, then an almost guilty hope. She holds her breath and watches him, waiting to see what he will do next. Kowalski moves like he's defusing another trap, but this time the danger is silence and fear, not a hidden switch. He kneels, fingers working carefully, prying away splintered wood and mortar, one fragment at a time. Dust blooms and then thins. Shafts of light cut through the dark. Every scrape is a promise. Sachiko's shoulders shake. Yuki's small hand clings tighter to her shirt. He keeps his motion slow, deliberate, voice soft in case sound itself will break them. As the last plank comes free, their faces are revealed to the day fragile, human, and Kowalski readies himself to lift them out. He steadies her with rough, surprisingly gentle hands, dust-streaked palms sliding beneath a thin kimono, a grip that says, "You're alive," without words. Sachiko's knees wobble. He pulls her up with slow, deliberate patience, and she lets him, eyes wide with confusion and relief. Then he lifts Yuki, a little tremor of a child, cradling her against his chest, forehead to shoulder, like sheltering a ruined sparrow. His rifle hangs forgotten at his side. For a moment the war shrinks to heartbeat and breath, a small, impossible mercy that already feels like a revolution. He guides them out, debris crunching under boot heels, and then he does something that makes the world tilt. He steps between mother and child and folds himself around them like a shield, his uniform a human wall against the ruined sky. Sachiko freezes, the prayer in her throat dissolving into confusion. This is not a demon, not the monster the radio warned about. It's a tired young man with dirt under his nails and a careful steadiness in his hands. Yuki buries her face in his jacket and stops trembling. Around them, other soldiers slow, eyes catching on the small, stubborn kindness, and for the first time, a doubt takes root. That single choice, lowering a rifle, offering a hand, became a crack in the towering wall of propaganda, a small fracture that let light through. In the hollow silence of a smashed house, a mother and child saw a man, not a monster, and that sight traveled faster than any leaflet. Other soldiers watched. Medics, interpreters, cooks, and engineers followed. Tiny human acts stacked on top of one another until incredulity turned into trust. A chocolate bar, a bandage, a bowl of rice, gestures that multiplied into thousands. What began as one quiet mercy became a movement, proof that one brave decision can start to rewrite a people's story. They see him lower the rifle, reach out simple, human. For a breath, everyone is still. Training, fear, habit, frozen. Then a change, a man breathes, a hand unclenches, a radio quiets. One by one, rifles dip, shoulders unclench, faces soften. What began as hesitation becomes a shared understanding. The platoon follows his quiet lead, choosing mercy over instinct. Kowalski's one quiet gesture doesn't stay quiet for long, it echoes. A pause, a dropped rifle, a look passed between men who'd been trained to kill, and suddenly they're choosing otherwise. Little acts stack up. A boot nudges aside rubble to free a child's hand, a ration packet is torn in two, a helmet becomes a cradle. Officers stop barking orders to shoot and start issuing ones to protect. Medics and stretcher bearers push forward. Cooks divert pots from troops to families. What began as a stunned hesitation hardens into a method. Fear met not with bullets, but with deliberate, organized compassion. Medics like Dr. Robert Sterling sprung into action, pitching canvas tents under smoke and rubble, dragging out stretchers and folding tables as if assembling a lifeline. They moved with quiet urgency, sorting the wounded, dressing shrapnel, soothing feverish children, steadying panicked parents, treating civilians alongside American soldiers without distinction. Their hands were steady, their supplies scarce, but every bandage and dose of medicine began to thaw the ice of fear, turning terror into tentative trust. Dr. Sterling moves with steady, practiced hands through the chaos, opening vials, flushing wounds, and slipping antibiotics into trembling limbs. He measures doses like prayers, penicillin for infection, glucose drips for the starving. Around him are hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, children whose ribs whisper beneath thin shirts, mothers who cradle emaciated infants as if holding faith itself. When swelling eases and a fever breaks, the astonishment is audible. Soft gasps, then a sob. To people who had known only hunger and fear, these medicines feel like miracles, proof, in a body and breath, that someone cares. Language can be a weapon, or it can be the first lifeline thrown across a trench. And that's exactly what Japanese-speaking American soldiers like Sergeant Robert Yamamoto became. Not glorified heroes, but steady, human translators in a world riven by fear. Yamamoto moves through ruined villages, interpreting sobs into questions, military orders into promises, and confusing gestures into clear instructions. He sits beside medic tents as doctor. Sterling works, telling parents that the bandage is safe, that the pills won't harm their children, that surrender is not dishonor. Small words, calming tones, a borrowed accent that bridges two terrified cultures, and in doing so begins to dismantle a lie. Sergeant Robert Yamamoto doesn't shout. He kneels, meets eyes, and speaks in a careful, steady Japanese that sounds almost like a promise, explaining quietly and plainly that these men in uniform are not monsters, but soldiers with orders to spare civilians, that food, medicine, and safety are what they mean to bring, not pain. He names things people understand: water, shelter, doctors, and answers the smallest, most terrified questions with patience. Faces that were set in steel from fear begin to loosen. A grandmother lowers her hand. A child peeks out. That single, calm translation turns rumor into doubt and opens a space where kindness can be seen as real. Words can calm, radios can translate, but it's the smallest things that crack a lie wide open. A bandage pressed to a fevered forehead, a steaming bowl of rice passed over broken concrete, an open hand offering water where no one expected mercy. Those gestures don't argue, they prove. They give people something real to touch, to taste, to remember. And in doing so, they dismantle the monstrous caricature brick by brick. Compassion becomes evidence. Trust begins in tiny, undeniable acts. And sometimes that proof looks like a single chocolate bar held out to a trembling child in a ditch, changing everything. In another bombed-out village, they find an 8-year-old boy, Hiroshi Nakamura, curled in a muddy ditch, orphaned, trembling so hard his shoulders shake. His clothes hang loose, his face smudged with ash, eyes wide and too old for his years. He doesn't move when they kneel, only breathes small, scared breaths, clutching something worn into a shape by habit, a rag, a scrap of life. There's no sob, just a stunned silence that tastes like loss. He flinches at every sound, every shadow, and then the distant thud of boots rolls closer. A huge, battle-weary soldier looms over the ditch, helmet scarred, pack sagging, every step a tired negotiation with the mud and rubble. He moves slow, like a man who has already given too much of himself. Hiroshi curls tighter, tiny knees to chest, breath hitched, every story he's been told screaming that this moment ends in fire. The soldier's shadow swallows him. The world narrows to the scrape of boot on earth and the pounding in a child's ears. For Hiroshi, there is no space for hope, only the waiting, and the small, terrible certainty that the worst has come. The soldier kneels, palms on the dirt to steady himself, reaches into his K-ration pack and pulls out a single square of chocolate, grim, greasy, precious, and holds it out. Simple and steady, no speech, no orders. Just that small human offering placed between war-worn fingers and a terrified boy, a quiet defiance against everything the island has been taught to fear. Hiroshi stares at the soldier's outstretched hand and the small square of chocolate like it's a miracle, as if a piece of the sun has fallen into the mud. The smell, sweet, foreign, impossible, fills the hollow of his hunger and wakes a memory he barely knew he had. For a child whose world has been ration lines, hiding places, and whispers of demons, this tiny human gesture cracks something open. He can't reconcile what he was taught with what his eyes are seeing. Trust feels dangerous and yet irresistible. His fingers twitch. He is on the edge of taking it. He tentatively takes the chocolate, fingers clumsy from hunger and fear, the wrapper crackling like a tiny, impossible fire. For a second he only stares, as if the sweetness is a rumor from another life, a mother's lap, a stolen festival, something erased by shells and ration lines. Then he bites. The chocolate melts warm and quick on his tongue, and his face hardened, cautious softens in a way that makes the soldier beside him catch his breath. It's a small, ordinary comfort that shouldn't exist here, and precisely because it does, it tastes like proof. Someone cared enough to share, and in that sharing, a little of the terror loosens its grip. From the dark doorways and shattered eaves, villagers watch silent, crouched, suspicious, while the boy lifts the chocolate to trembling lips. For a long beat, nothing happens. Then a small, stunned smile, a soldier's rough hand, rests gently on the child's shoulder. Eyes that were taught to see demons now see a human offering kindness. Mothers blink back tears. Old men avert their faces, ashamed of what they've believed. Whispers ripple down the rubble-strewn street. Is this the truth? The simple act of sharing a ration cracks something wide open, planting the first seeds of doubt, then of trust. They had been taught to fear the Americans as monsters, inhuman things that would slaughter without mercy. But then a battle-weary soldier crouched in a ditch and offered a wrapped piece of chocolate to a trembling child, and everything changed. The small, clumsy generosity, cut through years of lies like a blade. The soldier's hand, the crinkle of foil, the boy's hesitant fingers closing around sweetness he hadn't tasted in months. Villagers watched from the shadows, eyes wide, jaws slack. Doubt crept in where fear had lived. The monstrous image cracked. If demons could share their food, maybe the story they'd been told was a lie and that doubt would spread. What started as awkward, solitary kindness quickly snowballed into something much larger. Soldiers who shared chocolate, bandaged wounds, or simply lowered their guns were noticed, then copied, then talked about. Commanders couldn't ignore it. Quiet reports arrived at headquarters, and what had been improvisation became doctrine. Medics prioritized civilians. Cooks stretched rations to feed families. Translators were assigned to calm, terrified villages. Compassion turned into a tactic because it worked. It broke enemy propaganda, it saved lives, and it helped secure cooperation. The breakthrough spread up the chain of command, and before long, mercy wasn't just an impulse on the ground, it was the new strategy. Then, the orders changed quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Combat engineers, under pragmatic officers like Captain William Hayes, stopped treating villages as merely tactical problems and started treating them as people. They rerouted priorities. Sandbags and demolition charges gave way to pumps, pipe fittings, and generator parts. Where blueprints once meant destruction, they now sketched repairs, because winning here meant more than ground taken, it meant lives saved. Instead of only destroying enemy bunkers, they pivot, turning shovels toward life instead of death. Combat engineers and infantry clear rubble, shore up homes, and fix wells and pipes. Electricians splice broken lines. Field kitchens suddenly cook rice for hundreds. Tents become classrooms. Medics turn foxholes into clinics. It's frantic and urgent. Orders change on the fly because saving civilians speeds the campaign and saves lives. Word spreads that Americans bring bandages and bread, not terror. What started as isolated kindness becomes a deliberate, coordinated mission. Rebuild what war tried to erase, and in doing so, break the fear that kept people from choosing life. Hayes's unit swings from demolition to deliverance. They haul pumps, splice ruptured pipes, and crawl into rusted chambers that smell of rot and mud. Engineers patch valves by flashlight. Soldiers form a human chain to drag out debris. Then, after weeks of brackish rations and empty buckets, the first cleared jet arcs from a repaired outlet. People gasp, women drop their loads, children rush forward to drink, laughing through tears. Clean water is more than hygiene, it's salvation, a signal that someone cares. Word spreads fast. For thousands, it's the first sip of normalcy in weeks, and it changes everything. Combat engineers shifted gears, crawling over twisted pylons and snapped lines, working with wire and torch to splice life back into the grid. Fuses clicked, generators coughed to life, windows threw back the first flickers of light in days. Men cleared roads, tangled wreckage hauled away, routes opened so food, medicine, and word could finally flow into the waiting villages. In pockets of rubble and smoke, men used the only currency they had left, K-rations, and paid back a fractured humanity. A grunt peeled open a can, handed a biscuit to a trembling child. Another broke a chocolate bar in half for a starving mother. It was small. It was illegal, maybe. It was also irresistible. Faces that had been taught to see demons softened into puzzled hunger, then gratitude. Those quiet, furtive acts spread along the lines like a contagion of mercy, a tacit refusal to let orders eclipse decency, and they set the stage for something bigger. Community kitchens, medical tents, a war being fought in part with kindness. Field kitchens sprang up not as military conveniences, but as tiny lifelines, not just to feed GIs, but to boil pots of rice and simple soup that tasted like home to Okinawans. Soldiers traded scarce canned meat for rice. Men who'd been trained to destroy learned to ladle steaming bowls. The smell of warm rice and broth moved through ruined streets, pulling families out of hiding and turning suspicion into quiet, careful trust. It was simple, but it mattered. Battered soldiers hauling pots, lighting fires, and boiling rice and soup in field kitchens amid shattered houses. The steam rose like a small promise. When a weary mother felt warmth on her hands from a wooden bowl, when a child tasted plain rice for the first time in weeks and stopped trembling, propaganda's lies began to crumble. Sharing food became an unspoken apology and a deliberate respect, an offer of dignity where none had been left. Those warm meals opened a door to trust, and with that trust came the breathing room to care for the things war couldn't destroy: children's futures. They could see the children, wide eyes haunted by hunger and noise, and something in the soldiers shifted. Recognizing the trauma, men who had learned how to kill learned how to make a classroom. Tents and shell-blasted rooms cleared of rubble, crates turned into desks, a smudged board propped up against a wall. Soldiers knelt to tie laces, handed out torn picture books, and scavenged crayons, read aloud in halting Japanese, guided by bilingual men, and taught small routines: line up, wash up, sit down, as if those tiny rituals might stitch a daily life back together. Laughter came slow, then steady. The rooms became refuges, not battlefields. They understand that restoring a sense of normalcy for children is not a soft extra. It's essential medicine for a shattered community. So they set up classrooms in tents and ruined schools, hand out battered pencils and stolen moments of play, teach counting and song instead of weapons and fear. Children who once flinched at every footstep begin to laugh in the corners. Mothers watch, guarded hope slowly replacing terror. Those small routines, a midday rice bowl, a lesson, a lullaby, stitch families back together, calm minds frayed by constant danger, and make a frightened population willing to believe that life can go on. This campaign of compassion was never mere charity. It became a strategic masterstroke, a weapon forged from kindness that pierced the enemy's lies. Every bowl of rice, every repaired pump, every translator's gentle explanation chipped away at propaganda built on fear. Those small, calculated acts produced confusion where terror had lived, and that confusion turned quickly into trust. As civilians tasted medicine, light, and mercy, they carried new stories with them, precise, human accounts that directly contradicted the official myths. That testimony gave American forces information, cleared fields of danger, and above all, saved lives. Once the first stories left a village, the rest could not be contained. News in Okinawa moves by footsteps and whispers, not by headlines. One woman's trembling thanks becomes 10 people's astonished stories by dusk. Survivors who tasted warm rice or felt a bandage pressed to a child's wound walk from hamlet to hamlet, telling of soldiers who gave chocolate, fixed wells, and spoke in gentle Japanese. A single outstretched hand becomes proof you can hold, a ration shared, a doctor's small miracle, a bridge of words from Sergeant Yamamoto. Those eyewitness accounts ripple faster than any order. Fear loosens its grip. Doors that were barred begin to open, and the rumor of demons starts to look less and less believable. As word of kindness spreads, the terrifying stories of demons begin to crumble beneath the undeniable reality of food, medicine, and respect. Villagers who had been handed grenades now accept rice bowls from shaking hands. Mothers unclench. Children step out of hiding to take a piece of chocolate. Elders look on as wounds are dressed by foreign fingers. Rumors die on the lips of those who have seen the truth. These soldiers mend wells and boil water. They don't humiliate or terrorize. They kneel, they listen, they offer antibiotics like lifelines. Suspicion softens into gratitude, and that fragile trust will soon turn into cooperation. As trust spreads through shattered villages, people stop cowering and begin to point. At first, it's a finger from behind torn curtains, a whispered direction toward a cave mouth, a shallow ditch where rifles glint. Then, whole families step forward, leading troops to hidden machine gun nests and buried ammunition. Guides appear, old men who know goat paths, children who remember the lay of a ridge. Soldiers move with new precision. Fewer house-to-house confrontations turn violent. Lives are spared on both sides. Small, careful acts of cooperation multiply into a tactical advantage, and the war that once fed on fear now finds itself routed by information, by courage, by trust. As trust spreads through shattered villages, something almost unimaginable happens. The number of surrenders, both civilian and military, rises sharply. Men and women who once clutched grenades now step out into the open. Children tug at sleeves, soldiers lay down rifles and walk forward with palms raised. Medics and chaplains move between lines, treating wounds, offering water, bringing calm where panic ruled. The immediate effect is brutal and simple. Fewer firefights, fewer executions, fewer needless deaths. Lives that would have been snuffed out are spared on both sides, and each surrendered fighter becomes, in a small but crucial way, a seed for the peace that will follow. It wasn't diplomats in smoke-filled rooms or politicians polishing treaties who set the first stones of reconciliation after Okinawa. It was the soldiers on the streets, the medics in tarpaulin tents, the engineer crews patching wells, the private who handed a starving boy a piece of chocolate. Those small, dangerous choices, risking snipers to carry out a mother, trading a ration for a bowl of rice, speaking in a quiet voice to calm a child's terror, added up. Fear softened into trust. Stories of mercy spread faster than any order. From those muddy lanes and shattered homes rose the fragile, practical scaffolding of peace. They ripped through fortified lines and, in the same breath, dug wells and mended roofs. Under smoke and shellfire, engineers fixed water mains, medics set up tents, privates shared dwindling rations, and sergeants taught frightened children under tarps. These were not acts of charity tacked onto a battle plan. They were decisions taken between orders and mortars, deliberate, brave, quietly revolutionary. Each repaired pump and each warm bowl of rice became a tiny truce, a promise that life could continue. In choosing to save instead of simply destroy, these soldiers laid the first stones of a future neither side had dared imagine. Here is the ultimate paradox of Okinawa. The same force that stormed the island with artillery and flame also became an engine of mercy. It took men who had been trained to destroy and, in the middle of battle, choose instead to heal, clearing roads, fixing water systems, handing out food and medicine, sheltering children. Those weren't isolated kindnesses. They became a deliberate, organized response that undercut a lie and saved lives. The moral weight of that choice stayed with the soldiers' pride mixed with grief, and it altered how a devastated people remembered the day they learned that the enemy could be, shockingly, humane. For American soldiers like Kowalski, the war didn't end when the shooting stopped. It became a long, private reckoning. They returned home carrying two kinds of wounds, the obvious ones that a doctor could see, and the invisible ones that came from realizing they had been trained to kill, then chose to cradle a child instead. Nights were worst nightmares of bullets and orders, threaded with a softer, sharper image, a dusty woman's face, a tiny hand in theirs. That contradiction didn't make them saints or cowards, It made them human, forever balancing duty and mercy, guilt and a strange, stubborn pride in having saved the very people they'd been told were demons. For Okinawan survivors like Sachiko and Hiroshi, the greatest shock of the war wasn't the thunder of American guns, but the quiet, unexpected kindness: bandages instead of bayonets, warm rice instead of threats, hands that lifted children rather than delivered death. Years of propaganda had carved demons into their minds, and suddenly those demons fed them, healed them, and spoke softly in their own language. That contradiction didn't erase fear overnight. It lodged itself as a stubborn, bewildering relief that reshaped memory. Mercy didn't just save bodies, it rewrote what survival could mean, leaving scars and gratitude braided together for the rest of their lives. They spent the rest of their lives trying to reconcile two impossible truths: the horror that had nearly destroyed them, and the small, stubborn acts of mercy that saved them. Kindness felt like a wound and a salve, comforting, unbelievable, and almost unearned. Some carried gratitude that mixed with shame. Others kept the memory locked away, unable to accept that the monsters of legend had hands that fed, hands that bound wounds, hands that lifted children. Those quiet, daily mercies rewired communities, altered loyalties, and left a question burning in every survivor's chest. What does this say about who we are? The story forces us to confront a fundamental question about our nature. Is our shared humanity a conscious choice we must make, especially in the worst of times? After watching soldiers lower rifles to shield strangers, after seeing mothers unlearn the lie they'd been fed, you feel that maybe compassion is a deliberate act, something we decide the moment fear screams for violence. But then you see children fed chocolate, medics stitching wounds with steady hands, and you wonder if something quieter survives inside us despite propaganda and pain. Is kindness a taught strategy, or a stubborn spark we refuse to let die? Or maybe it's something older, quieter, an instinct that refuses to be erased, no matter how loud the lies. Even when people are taught to see monsters, someone can still reach out a hand. That reach unsettles everything. Orders become optional, fear cracks, and a single act of mercy becomes proof that the world can be otherwise. What does that say about us? That bravery isn't only measured in how fast we can destroy, but in the harder, rarer choice to protect. In the worst moments, the courage to save can remake a life, a village, even the story a people tell about themselves. What will we choose?